The first thing that hit Darien Voss when he stepped off his ship wasn't the stench of unwashed bodies or recycled air thick with smoke from a dozen different worlds. It was the sound, a cacophony of alien tongues haggling, arguing, pleading. Shadowport Station lived up to its reputation as the galaxy's most notorious black market hub, a place where morality was just another commodity to be bought and sold. Darien pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his shoulders, trying to blend in among the crowd of smugglers, pirates, and worse. He'd never wanted to come to this hellhole, but when your ship's quantum drive starts failing 3 sectors from the nearest legitimate repair station, desperate times called for desperate measures. Exotic spices from the Andorian Rim, a 6-armed merchant called out. Weapons that can punch through Alliance armor, shouted another. Darien ignored them all, his steel-gray eyes scanning the maze of stalls and vendors for the parts dealer his contact had mentioned. The sooner he found what he needed, the sooner he could leave this cesspit behind. Shadowport was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, its tunnels branching off in all directions like the veins of some massive dead creature. Neon signs flickered in languages from across the known galaxy, casting eerie shadows on the rocky walls. The artificial gravity was set too low, making every step feel like he might float away at any moment. Darien's communicator buzzed against his wrist. Any luck finding those quantum stabilizers? The voice belonged to Rico Mendez, his engineer and the closest thing to family he had left. Still looking, Darien muttered, weaving between a group of Thraxian traders. This place is a maze. Well, make it fast. We've got maybe 6 hours before the drive completely fails. After that, we'll be drifting dead in space. Understood? Darien cut the connection and quickened his pace. He'd been a pilot in the Terran fleet once, before politics and corruption had driven him to resign his commission. Now he ran cargo between the outer colonies, barely making enough to keep his ship running and his small crew fed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, something that seemed to matter less and less in the galaxy these days. A commotion up ahead caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around something, their voices raised in excitement. Darien tried to push past them, but the press of bodies was too thick. Then he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, whimpering, soft, frightened, and distinctly feminine. Against his better judgment, Darien shouldered his way through the crowd until he could see what had captured their attention. In the center of a makeshift arena stood a massive cage, its bars thick and reinforced. Inside, huddled together on dirty straw, were 3 figures that made his heart skip a beat. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. Their skin was a pale silver blue, marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the harsh lights. Pointed ears peeked through long, silky hair that ranged from deepest black to moonlight silver. But it was their eyes that captured him, large, luminous, and unmistakably feline in their vertical pupils. Despite their obvious fear, they carried themselves with a dignity that the squalor of their prison couldn't diminish. Prime specimens, bellowed the seller, a corpulent Garathian whose multiple chins wobbled as he spoke. Genuine Valerian females, caught during the recent purge of their homeworld. Rare delicacies, tender as morning dew. Delicacies. The word hit Darien like a plasma bolt to the chest. These weren't just slaves, they were being sold as food. The tallest of the 3, her hair black as space, and her silver markings forming elegant spirals down her arms, lifted her head and met Darien's gaze. There was no pleading in those alien eyes, no hope for rescue. Just a quiet acceptance of fate that somehow made it worse. Her lips moved silently, and though Darien couldn't understand the words, he felt their meaning in his bones. Please. How much? The question was out of his mouth before his brain could stop it. The Garathian's piggy eyes lit up with greed. Ah, connoisseur. For all 3, I could let them go for 30,000 credits. 30,000. It was almost everything Darien had, including the money he needed for the quantum stabilizers. Without those parts, his ship would be dead in space within hours. His crew would die. He would die. They looked diseased, Darien said, falling into the rhythm of negotiation despite the churning in his stomach. Malnourished. Probably half dead already. Nonsense, the Garaffian protested. These are royal bloodlines. See the markings? Pure breeding, guaranteed. The middle sister, her hair a striking silver and her markings forming delicate patterns like frost on a window, pressed closer to the bars. Her lips parted slightly, revealing small, pointed canines, and she spoke in a voice like wind chimes. Please, ... We are not food. We are ... people. She spoke standard. Somehow, that made it infinitely worse. 15,000, Darien countered, his throat dry as sand. Final offer. What followed was 20 minutes of the most brutal negotiation of his life. Every credit he knocked off the price was a victory, but also a step closer to condemning his crew to a slow death in the void. The youngest of the sisters, barely more than a girl, with hair like starlight and markings that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, watched him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. Finally, they settled on 22,000 credits. Everything Darien had except for a few hundred for emergency supplies. The Garaffian's fat fingers danced over a credit scanner, and Darien's entire fortune disappeared with a soft chime. Pleasure doing business, human. Cage included no extra charge. The lock disengaged with a heavy clunk, and the door swung open. The 3 Valarian females didn't move at first, as if afraid this might be some cruel joke. Then the eldest, the one with the spiral markings, slowly stepped forward. You bought us? She asked in that musical voice, confusion evident despite the language barrier. I'm getting you out of here, Darien said, extending his hand. My name is Darien Voss. I captain a cargo ship called the Stardrift. The eldest Valarian stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before carefully taking it. Her fingers were slender and warm, with tiny pads on the fingertips like a cat's paws. I am called Naya, she said. These are my sisters Zira and Kes. Darien nodded to each of them in turn. Zira, the silver-haired one, watched him with cautious intelligence, while Kes, the youngest, tilted her head as if listening to something only she could hear. Can you walk? Darien asked. We are weak, Naya admitted, but we can manage. Good. Stay close to me and don't talk to anyone. Darien shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over Naya's shoulders. It was too large for her slender frame, but it provided some modesty and warmth. He wished he had more to offer her sisters. As they made their way through the crowds of Shadowport, Darien's mind raced. He had no quantum stabilizers, no credits, and now 3 alien refugees who would be hunted by every slaver and bounty hunter in the sector. His ship was dying. His crew was depending on him, and he'd just made the most foolish decision of his life. But when he glanced back at the 3 Valarian sisters walking behind him, their heads held high despite their ordeal, their alien grace undiminished by captivity, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Where do we go now? Naya asked softly, her accent giving the standard words a melodic quality. Darien looked ahead at the maze of tunnels leading back to his ship, then at the credits display on his communicator, showing a balance of 300 and change. Home, he said finally. We're going home. He just had no idea how they were going to survive long enough to get there. The first thing Naya noticed about the human ship wasn't its cramped corridors or the hum of aging machinery. It was the emotions that saturated every surface years of loneliness, determination, and a deep-seated loyalty that spoke of bonds forged in hardship. For a Valarian with empathic abilities, Stepping aboard the Stardrift was like walking into a living memory. "Rico, get us out of here." Darian's voice echoed through the ship's comm system as they hurried toward what she assumed was the bridge. "We've got company coming." The human Darian moved with practiced efficiency through his vessel, but Naya could sense the turmoil beneath his calm exterior. Guilt, fear, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Her sisters followed close behind, Zira's silver hair catching the corridor lights, while little Kes seemed to float rather than walk, her precognitive gifts already reaching toward possible futures. The bridge was small but functional, dominated by a viewport that showed the chaotic beauty of Shadowport Station. A stocky man with grease-stained coveralls looked up from his console, his weathered face creased with worry. "About time, Captain. We've got 3 security cutters launching from the station, and they don't look friendly." Rico's eyes widened when he saw the sisters. "Holy stars, you actually bought them?" "Long story," Darian said, settling into the pilot's seat. "Just get us out of here." Naya moved to the viewport, her sisters flanking her as the Stardrift pulled away from the station. She could feel the tension radiating from both humans. Darian's guilt over spending their survival money, Rico's confusion and concern. But underneath it all was something that made her heart race. Genuine care for their well-being. "They're gaining," Rico reported. "Whatever you paid for them, someone wants them back badly." Darian's hands flew over the controls, and Naya felt a spike of his determination. "Not happening. Plot a course for the Veil Nebula. We can lose them in the gas clouds." As the ship accelerated, Naya closed her eyes and let her empathic senses extend outward. The pursuing ships blazed with predatory hunger and cold calculation. But here on the Stardrift, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Safety. Not just physical safety, but the emotional sanctuary of being truly cared for. "You risk much for strangers," she said softly, not turning from the VIEWPORT.DARIAN glanced back at her, and she caught a flash of his thoughts before he could guard them. Images of his own captivity during the war, the feeling of helplessness, the gratitude toward those who had eventually rescued him. "You're not strangers," he said simply. "You're people who needed help." The words were so honest, so free of the deception she'd grown used to from their captors, that Naya felt something crack open inside her chest. Valerian females bonded for life, but their homeworld's destruction had left her and her sisters believing they'd never find mates worthy of that sacred connection. Yet here was a human who'd sacrificed everything for them without asking for anything in return. "Entering the nebula now," Rico announced. "Sensors are useless in here, so if we can't see them, they can't see us either." The viewport filled with swirling clouds of crimson and gold gas, beautiful and treacherous. Darian navigated by instinct and skill, threading between gravitational anomalies that would crush an inexperienced pilot. "We should be safe here for a while," he said, finally leaning back in his chair. "Time to figure out our next move. First," Naya said, turning to face him fully, "we must tell you what we are. What you have truly rescued." Darian's eyebrows rose. "I know you're Valerians. Beyond that, I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." The simple respect in his words made Naya's throat tight. She looked at her sisters, seeing her own emotions reflected in their alien eyes. Zira nodded encouragingly, while Kes tilted her head, her silver eyes unfocused as she gazed into possible futures. "We are not merely another species," Naya began, choosing her words carefully. "Valerians are empathically bonded creatures. We feel the emotions of others, share thoughts and dreams with those we love. When we mate, it is not just physical. We become connected at the deepest level of consciousness." She paused, watching for revulsion or fear in Darian's expression. Instead, she saw only curiosity and growing understanding. "Our world. Velaris was destroyed 3 months ago," Zira added, her voice carrying the musical accent of their people. We are among the last of our kind. The hegemony claimed we were a threat, Kes whispered, her young voice heavy with grief. Our abilities made them uncomfortable. They said we could control minds. Can you? Rico asked bluntly. No, Naya said firmly. We feel emotions, sometimes share thoughts with willing partners, but we cannot control. That would be abhorrent to us, a violation of everything we believe. Darian leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. How many survivors? Perhaps a few hundred scattered across the galaxy, Naya replied. Most sold into slavery, some hidden in remote colonies. We 3 were captured trying to reach the outer rim. The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of the ship's systems. Naya could feel Darian processing this information, his emotions cycling through anger, sadness, and a fierce protectiveness that made her pulse quicken. I'm sorry, he said finally. I can't imagine losing everything like that. You understand loss, Naya observed gently. I can feel it in you. Your own pain. Darian's expression hardened slightly. My squadron. We were betrayed during the Centauri campaign. I was the only one who made it out. The raw grief in his voice made all 3 sisters step closer instinctively. Naya reached out, her fingertips barely brushing his arm, and shared a moment of wordless comfort, not invading his thoughts, but simply letting him feel that he wasn't alone with his pain. Your loyalty to them honors their memory, she said softly. For a moment, something electric passed between them. Naya felt her empathic abilities responding to his emotional resonance in ways she'd never experienced. Among her people, the first stirrings of a mating bond felt like coming home after a long journey. What she felt now was similar, but deeper, as if she were discovering rooms in her soul she'd never known existed. Naya, Kes whispered urgently, her precognitive gift suddenly flaring. The bond, I can see it forming. Darian looked between them, confused. What bond? The connection between life mates, Zira explained gently. It begins with emotional resonance and grows stronger through shared experience and trust. Wait, Darian stood, suddenly looking panicked. I'm not. I mean, you barely know me. This is just gratitude, or maybe some kind of biochemical response to the rescue. It is not gratitude, Naya interrupted, stepping closer. Valerians cannot bond through gratitude alone. The connection forms only with true emotional compatibility. She could feel his confusion, his fear of taking advantage of their vulnerable state, warring with something deeper, an attraction that went beyond the physical to touch, the very core of who he was. This is crazy, he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. You're refugees fleeing genocide. I'm a washed-up pilot with a dying ship. This isn't some romantic adventure story. No, Naya agreed, moving close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. This is 3 women who thought they would die as slaves, and a man who proved that honor still exists in the galaxy. This is the possibility of love growing from the ashes of loss. Darian stared at her for a long moment, and Naya felt his defenses slowly crumbling. The bond between them pulsed stronger, a golden thread of connection that would only grow with time and nurturing. The quantum drive, Rico said suddenly, breaking the spell. Without those stabilizers, we'll be dead in the water in a few hours. Reality crashed back down. Darian stepped away from Naya, his expression torn between longing and responsibility. He's right. I can't protect you if we're stranded in space. Darian moved back to his console. There's a salvage yard on Kepler Station. They might have what we need. The station is controlled by the Merchant Guild, Rico warned. They don't ask questions, but they charge premium prices. We have 300 credits left, Darian said grimly. Not nearly enough. Naya exchanged glances with her sisters. They'd been slaves, treated as property to be bought and sold. But they were also Valerians, with abilities that went far beyond simple empathy. There may be another way, she said carefully. Valerians have certain capabilities that others might value. Darian turned, his expression immediately protective. Absolutely not. I didn't rescue you from slavery just to have you sell yourselves again. The fierce determination in his voice sent warmth flooding through Naya's chest. This was a man worth bonding with, one who would protect what he loved, no matter the cost. Not that, she assured him quickly. Our empathic abilities have practical applications. We can sense deception, read emotional states, even influence others' feelings to some degree. Merchants would pay well for such services. Negotiation assistance, Zira added. We could help broker deals, detect lies, ease tensions. Darian considered this, his internal struggle clear to Naya's enhanced senses. He needed their help to survive, but accepting it meant acknowledging that they were partners now, not just refugees he'd rescued. Partners? He asked finally, extending his hand. Naya took it without hesitation, feeling the spark of their forming bond intensify at the contact. Partners, she agreed. As the Stardrift changed course toward Kepler Station, Naya settled beside Darian at the pilot's console. The bond between them was still fragile, untested by the trials she knew were coming. But for the first time since her world had burned, she felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. The future spread before them like the star-filled void outside their ship, vast, uncertain, and beautiful with possibility. Zira had always been the cautious one among her sisters. Where Naya led with empathic intuition, and Kes followed her visions of possible futures, Zira approached the world through careful observation and measured responses. It was a trait that had served her well as a healer on Velaris. But here in the depths of an abandoned asteroid mining facility, caution felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. Are you certain this place is safe? She whispered, her silver hair catching the dim emergency lighting that flickered throughout the derelict corridors. Darian moved ahead of them with practiced stealth, his hand resting on the plasma pistol at his hip. They'd been forced to abandon the Stardrift at Kepler Station when bounty hunters had tracked them there, escaping in a stolen mining shuttle that had barely held together long enough to reach this forgotten outpost. Safe is relative, he replied quietly. But it's been abandoned for 3 years. The ore veins played out, and the mining consortium moved on. We should have time to make repairs and plan our next move. Behind them, Rico struggled with a portable fusion generator they'd salvaged from their ship, while Naya supported little Kes, who had been growing weaker by the day. The constant use of her precognitive abilities to guide their escape had taken its toll on the youngest sister. There, Darian said, indicating a heavy door marked with mining symbols. Emergency shelter. Should have basic life support and medical facilities. The door's manual override took all of Darian's strength to activate, the ancient mechanisms grinding in protest. Inside, emergency power flickered to life, revealing a small but well-equipped survival shelter designed to house mining crews during emergencies. Finally, Rico gasped, setting down the generator with obvious relief. I was starting to think we'd end up breathing vacuum. Zira moved immediately to Kes, her healer's instincts overriding her usual reserve. The girl was pale, her silver markings dim and lifeless. She needs rest, Zira said, guiding her youngest sister to one of the emergency bunks. The visions are consuming too much of her life force. Can you help her? Darian asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Zira hesitated. Galarian healing was an intimate process, requiring physical contact and emotional vulnerability. Since their capture, she'd barely been able to touch her own sisters, let alone a virtual stranger. The trauma of being handled like livestock had left invisible scars on all of them, but Zira's had cut the deepest. Her gift required trust, and trust was something the slavers had systematically destroyed. I can try, she said softly, then looked up at Darian with troubled silver eyes. But I will need ... space. privacy. Healing requires a calm emotional environment. Darian nodded immediately. Rico, help me get the generator connected to the shelter systems. We'll give them room. As the two men moved to the far end of the shelter, Zira knelt beside Kess's bunk. Naya joined her, providing emotional support through their sisterly bond. The connection between the three of them had been their lifeline during the darkest days of captivity, and it remained their greatest strength. "Show me," Zira whispered, placing her hands gently on Kess's temples. The youngest sister's mind was a storm of overlapping visions, fragments of possible futures that shifted and changed like wind-blown leaves. Zira saw flashes of their potential destinies. Safety on a distant world, captured by the hegemony, Darian lying motionless in a pool of his own blood. She jerked back with a gasp. The last vision, when does it happen? Kess's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and distant. Soon, she whispered. He will be hurt protecting us. The choice will be yours, sister. Trust or let him die. A chill ran down Zira's spine. Her healing abilities were powerful, but they required absolute trust between healer and patient. She would have to open herself completely to Darian, sharing not just her power, but her deepest emotions and memories. After months of violation and abuse, the thought terrified her. A sudden impact against the shelter's outer door interrupted her thoughts. Then another, stronger this time. They found us, Rico said grimly, checking his weapon. Darian was already moving, sealing the inner doors and activating whatever defensive systems the shelter possessed. How many? He called to Kess. The girl's procognitive sight flickered like a candle in the wind. 6. No, 8. Heavily armed. They want us alive, but they will kill you to get us. Not happening, Darian said flatly. He turned to Rico. Can you get a distress signal out? Maybe reach a Terran patrol? In this dead zone? Not likely. The pounding on the outer door intensified, joined by the whine of plasma cutters. Whoever was hunting them had come prepared for a siege. There's a service tunnel, Darian said, studying the shelter's schematic. It leads to the mining complex's main shaft. If we can reach it, the outer door exploded inward with a burst of superheated metal. Smoke filled the shelter as armed figures poured through the breach. Darian shoved the sisters behind an overturned table and returned fire, his plasma bolts lighting up the confined space like lightning. Surrender, human, one of the attackers shouted over the chaos. We only want the Valerians. You can walk away from this. Go to hell, Darian replied, sending another volley toward their position. Zira watched in horror as the battle raged around them. Darian fought with desperate skill, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. When Rico cried out and fell, clutching a smoking wound in his shoulder, she knew it was only a matter of time. Then she saw it happen, exactly as Kess had foreseen. A slaver with a neural disruptor appeared at Darian's flank while he was focused on targets to his front. The weapon discharged with a crackling hiss, and Darian collapsed, his body convulsing as electrical fire raced through his nervous system. No! The scream tore from Zira's throat before she could stop it. The slavers moved quickly, securing the shelter and checking their prize. Their leader, a scarred Corvan with cybernetic implants covering half his face, knelt beside Darian's still form. He's alive, but barely, the alien reported. Neural disruptor scrambled his brain patterns pretty good. He'll be a vegetable in an hour if he doesn't get medical attention. Leave him, another slaver commanded. We have what we came for. But Zira was already moving. All her fear, all her trauma, melted away in the face of watching the man who'd saved them die for his kindness. She dropped to her knees beside Darian, placing her hands on his chest and ignoring the weapons trained on her. What's she doing? The Corvan demanded. Healing him, Naya said, moving to shield her sister. It's what she does. Zira closed her eyes and let her consciousness sink deep into Darian's damaged neural pathways. The disruptor had wreaked havoc on his nervous system, severing connections and scrambling the delicate electrical patterns that govern thought and memory. It was the most complex healing she'd ever attempted. But as she worked, something unexpected happened. The barriers she'd built around her heart began to crumble. Darian's memories flowed through their connection. His childhood on a farming world, his pride the day he'd earned his pilot's wings, the guilt that haunted him over his lost squadron. She saw his genuine care for his small crew, his loneliness, and most surprisingly, the growing love he felt for her and her sisters. There was no deception in him, no hidden agenda. Just a fundamentally good man who'd chosen to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. The realization shattered the last of her defenses, and she poured all of her power into healing not just his body, but his spirit. Incredible, the Corvin breathed. I've never seen healing like that. The consortium will pay triple for one with those abilities. Zira felt Darian's consciousness stirring, his neural patterns slowly realigning under her touch. But the healing had drained her, and she swayed as exhaustion crashed over her like a tide. Leave them alone. Darian's voice was weak but clear. He struggled to sit up, his gray eyes blazing with fury as he took in the situation. Somehow, impossibly, he'd retained enough strength to reach for his dropped weapon. The lead slaver laughed. You can barely stand, human. What are you going to do? This, Darian said simply, and triggered the fusion generator's emergency overload. The next few seconds passed in a blur of chaos. Alarm screamed as the generator began to destabilize, its containment field fluctuating wildly. The slavers scrambled for the exit, knowing they had perhaps 30 seconds before the entire shelter became a small star. The service tunnel. Rico shouted, dragging himself upright despite his wound. Darian hauled Zira to her feet, while Naya supported Kess. Together, they stumbled through the hidden maintenance access just as the first containment warnings began to sound. The tunnel was narrow and cramped, barely wide enough for a human, but it led away from the impending explosion. They emerged into the main mining shaft just as the shelter detonated behind them, the blast wave shaking dust from the ancient rock walls. Emergency shuttles were already launching from the facilities. Docking bays, the slavers fleeing for their lives. That was incredibly stupid, Rico panted, slumping against a support strut. But effective, Naya observed. Helping Kess sit down on a chunk of ore, Zira found herself staring at Darian, her silver eyes wide with wonder. The healing had created a connection between them, not as deep as the empathic bond forming between him and Naya, but real nonetheless. She could feel his exhaustion, his relief, and underneath it all, a warmth that made her heart race. You saved me, she said softly. You saved me first, he replied, moving to check Rico's wound. That neural disruptor should have left me brain dead. The healing required ... double quotes. Zira struggled to find the words. I had to trust you completely. Open myself to you without reservation. I thought I had lost that ability. Darian paused in his examination of Rico's shoulder, meeting her gaze directly. And now? Zira felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Now I begin to understand what my sister sees in you. What we all might see, given time. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Rico cleared his throat pointedly, breaking the spell. As touching as this is, we're still stranded in an abandoned mine with limited supplies and no ship. Actually, Kess said, her voice stronger now as she was no longer burning herself out with constant visions. I saw something interesting while we were hiding. There's an old survey ship in the lower docking bay. Forgotten and abandoned, but possibly functional. Darian raised an eyebrow. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because in most timelines, we never made it this far, she admitted. But Zira's choice to heal you changed everything. The future is brighter now. As they made their way deeper into the abandoned facility, Zira walked beside Darian in comfortable silence. The fear that had gripped her for so long was finally beginning to fade, replaced by something she'd thought lost forever: hope. Her sisters had found something precious in this human who'd sacrificed everything for strangers. And now, through the intimate act of healing, she was beginning to understand what that something was. It wasn't just desire or gratitude. It was the possibility of love deep enough to heal even the deepest wounds. The old survey ship, when they found it, was a marvel of Terran engineering from a bygone era. Sleek and elegant despite decades of neglect, it sat in its docking cradle like a sleeping bird of prey. "She's beautiful," Darian breathed, running his hands along the ship's hull. "Pre-war design, military-grade systems. If we can get her running ... we'll need a new name," Rico said, already opening access panels to check the ship's condition. "Something that reflects our new circumstances." Naya looked at her sisters, then at Darian. The bond between them all was growing stronger, more complex. Not just the romantic connections forming between the sisters and the man who'd saved them, but something deeper, the foundation of a family forged by choice rather than blood. "Sanctuary," Zira said quietly. "We'll call her Sanctuary. A place where broken things can be made whole again." Darian smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him since their first meeting. "Sanctuary it is. Our new home." As they began the work of bringing the old ship back to life, Zira allowed herself to imagine a future where the four of them might find not just survival, but genuine happiness among the stars. It was a dream worth healing for, worth trusting for, worth loving for. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but it also held the possibility of redemption for those brave enough to reach for it. And reach for it they would, together.